Hello, and welcome to this panel in which we want to explore if and how the Nordics can play a major role in the blooming hydrogen economy. My name is Andreas Bliasbach, and I'm leading the activities around hydrogen energy storage here at EY in the Nordics. The way we produce, handle, and consume energy is an unprecedented transition. We are quickly moving away from steady state to intermittent power production and from conventional to smart. This, in combination with the need to quickly and deeply decarbonize our economy to avoid and abate the worst effects of the looming climate crisis, requires determined action. The Nordic countries have long had the strong ambitions to become leaders of the energy transition. With generally broad acceptance on climate-related actions, high targets for decarbonization in both the public but also the private space, access to significant amounts of clean and cheap energy, and a prowess and innovation that together, in combination, sets us apart. The Nordics are set to make hydrogen another industrial success story, but time doesn't wait. Many European neighbors have been quicker in publishing their national strategies and more ambitious when setting targets and presenting a vision of hydrogen's role in their prospective future markets. Does this hesitation in the Nordics slow down investment in industry and those companies that are already pushing the hydrogen economy forward? And if we can agree on that there's a potential both for hydrogen in the Nordics as well as the Nordics in hydrogen, which barriers are there for us to overcome? And if so, which significant industries and assets and synergies do the Nordics have that can fast-track growth in the hydrogen economy? So let's go and meet the panel. With this, I have now the great pleasure and honor to welcome and introduce our great panel. I will keep the introductions short to maximize the time that we have for discussion. With us today, we have Kjell Christian Bjørnsen, CFO of Nel, Niklas Gustafsson, CSO and Head of Sustainability and Public Affairs at Volvo Group, and Hans Kreisel, CEO of Nordic Energy. I would like to begin the discussion by taking temperature of the Nordic hydrogen market. Opening the newspapers, we are bombarded with new projects, with announcements on market projections and toppling each other in size, and one partnership declaration following the other. But what's actually the status of the Nordics, and how does the Nordics compare to the rest of Europe in terms of both activity and attractiveness? And I would like to direct this question initially to you, Kjell Christian, and ask you about your view.
So it's a very good question because this is changing so rapidly. You know, if you had gone back a couple of years, it would have been very difficult to say where would hydrogen really take off first. But what happened last year with the green recovery after COVID, that push across the European Union meant that the EU is now put in the driver's seat. And in that, of course, the Nordics have a very prominent position. And the prominent position is to a large extent driven by the customer side. Now, we are a producer where we produce in Norway, in the US and Denmark, but what drives where we sell our products is the customer side, and we have very good Swedish and Danish customers and potential customers that we are confident will drive this forward, meaning that Sweden and Denmark in particular are very, very important markets for us also in the near term.
Turning to you, Hans, and looking both at the dramatic increase in the projected gas grid development that has been published in the revision of the European Hydrogen Backbone paper, was that in response to the activity in the Nordic markets and also in response to what you just heard from Nel?
Well, yeah, I have to say, no, I can't really answer that question, and I'll give you why. I have to put this in a bit of perspective. See, I'm also chairman of our industry association in Brussels, and we've been working on this issue for several years right now. And if you come into just what Kjell mentioned, the development in Europe, we've seen over the last actually 5-6 years in the COP21 an enormous development on the need of setting up very forward-leaning targets, both through the the fourth energy package and the Green Deal package, and now the Fit for 55 that's coming up in just a couple of weeks. There has been a need to find a way to transcend from the fossil fuels that we have in Europe. And you all have to know that, I mean, the electricity side that we've been working on for the last decades, that represents around 2,500 terawatt hours in Europe, whereof 800 terawatt hours renewable. The fossil side, that's 12,500 terawatt hours that we are now addressing through this package. And that gives us two big challenges. One is, of course, building all that electricity, and that is going to move out also to the outskirts of the energy systems, because that will be wind power offshore and things like that, and building the infrastructure to support that. The need for structure that sort of huge volumes of electricity hasn't really been possible, not with batteries anyway. That was very in, is still, but was very in just a couple of years ago. Hydrogen has basically become the silver bullet here. The silver bullet that makes it possible to transition from electricity intermittent production over to some sort of stable usage of the energy carrier. So what we've seen in the Nordics has just been a response to that, I would say. But that was also suddenly a solution for the chemical industry and the steel industry in Sweden. They suddenly got the possibility to access huge volumes of energy that were clean. Previously, when we were fighting around biogas issues, that was too small volumes to be possible to address these big companies. So our response now, building out an infrastructure for that, is just we are doing this in Sweden, but this is happening in all the European countries right now. So we have a bit larger challenge, though, due to the very tallness of our country, but I think we will solve that at the end as well. But you can look out next week. We will publish a pathway study that will reveal how the division between methane, hydrogen, and electricity could look like from an infrastructure standpoint.
Looking forward to it. Very good. If we look at Volvo as a global player, how does that resonate with you, Niklas? And what's your view on this, and in particular the view on the Nordic market and your activity here?
Yes, thank you, Andreas. I think I'll start with fully supporting you in your statement that we are actually getting bombarded with news around everything with hydrogen, and it's been a huge message flow here the past year, and it's a sort of a contradiction in terms, I would say, that during this year of pandemic, we are moving, all of us is moving so extremely fast in this area, and it's interesting. It's a lot of partnerships, as you say, and for Volvo, then Volvo Group being present in 190 countries and all over the world, and actually doing production and development R&D more or less on all continents in the world. It's a bit interesting to look upon the Nordics. Of course, we are headquartered in Sweden, and we are a Swedish company after all, so it's of course of importance. But it's even more important to look from our point of view, to look at Sweden and at Nordics in times of transition, in times of big paradigm shifts. And that's exactly where we are now in the automotive industry, especially in heavy-duty vehicle industry, because we are actually leaving the era of the fossil fuels and going into new technologies and new green energies, obviously. And hydrogen is a very important piece of this puzzle going forward. We will have technologies both for battery electric vehicles and for fuel cell electric vehicles. And I'm happy to go into a little bit more depth on that maybe later on. But when it comes to the Nordics and for Volvo Group, this is key when we are talking about big technology leaps as we are doing now, because we really want to do this development close to our home with the partners around the table, by the way, but also other partners that we know well. And we have a good climate in the Nordics for this type of partnerships. We are not just signing up and sending out press releases on the partnerships. We're actually doing stuff together and investing for real together. And I think this is the key with the Nordics, that we have a certain ability to actually do that for real. And that is good. But as Hans is saying, I think we need to secure now that we are not too relaxed and just do as we usually do when we work together, because in the Nordics, I'm a little bit worried that we are a bit behind some other parts, at least in Europe, but also in other parts of the world. And they are moving extremely quickly now in all parts of the world, right? And huge amount of funding, of investments is being done everywhere. So if we believe that the Nordics can still be in lead in this transition and being the sustainability guys of the world, well, yes, let's prove that together. It's not a given this time, I think, because we don't have the traditions and the large investments done since decades back in infrastructure to the same extent as other parts of the world has when it comes to hydrogen.
Thanks. I think this resonates very well with what we can see with clients, and the point with where we need to pick up pace and speed. I think that we will get back to that a little bit later. But when it comes to, and both you and Hans mentioned this, these different applications that we need to apply together to get to the goal. I mean, producing hydrogen by itself, that doesn't generate value. We always have to look at the consumption in the different applications in the end to close the value pool and understand where the value is derived, right? And in general, what we see is there's a set of traditional and mature applications of hydrogen, and that's the hydrogen market that we see today. And a lot of this is driven by gray and brown and black hydrogen. But then we also see all these new applications that are in themselves very promising, but in their respective markets, they are not yet mature. And looking at the Nordics, and I would like to direct that question initially to you, Kjell Christian, what do you think are the first no-regret applications that we can see here? And maybe that resonates also with your client base. And then on top of that, when will those hydrogen technologies and also those applications, both in terms of the application, but also the availability of hydrogen in those setting and markets, when will that bleed into those applications that are currently maybe not the most obvious applications?
So a good set of questions. So let me try and address it. And I think Hans mentioned something earlier that's very important. That the challenge is quite large, and hydrogen is growing from a very small base. So we are at the beginning of industrialization on hydrogen. Technology is ready, but it needs to be scaled up to get the cost down. And this is where we need some incentives now to begin with, where we need a government push to get it done. To put that into context, in 2019, the global market for hydrogen electrolyzers was about 100 megawatt. We are building one line in Norway that has an annual capacity of 500 megawatts, so 5 times the global market. That seems like a crazy bet in most industries. In 2030, there are EU ambitions around 80 gigawatt if you count some of the surrounding countries, and in 2050, the target is somewhere around 4,000 gigawatt, depending on source. So 4 million megawatt. We are at the beginning of industrialization, and that we should always keep in mind. When it comes to markets, there are a number of large users of hydrogen today. Mainly ammonia, to a large extent for fertilizer, then refineries for upgrading the crude oil quality, and methanol, and then a long tail of other applications. In all of these, you can simply swap out what you have today with the hydrogen that you produce in a renewable way, and you don't need to do any market development. It's a pure direct substitution effect. And therefore, you would, of course, expect me to say that those are the markets that go first. And we see that to some extent happening. We see it on the ammonia side, and we see it on the refinery side. Where the surprises are on two other kind of industries. We see it on heavy-duty vehicles, where we have a good example here. Some tech development is still needed. Of course, it needs to come to a proper product, but it's not in the distant future. And the other part, which is very relevant from the Swedish heritage, is also the steel sector. The steel sector seem to have woken up to the call to do something, and that hydrogen is the way they want to go. And the amount of interest we have from Swedish steel industry and steel industry elsewhere is enormous, and we definitely see that as a very, very interesting market going forward.
So if we look short to midterm, we are looking, in general, we see peer-to-peer projects emerging first, turning into clusters, later developing into hubs and valleys, and before we move into a fully commodity market, right? So, Hans, what's your view on the long-term development of hydrogen uptake industries? And Christian also already mentioned a few, both in the mobility but also in industry, and right in your initial statement, the handling of intermittent power production. That's of course an industry and a sector in the energy space that needs to have storage too. So, what's your view on the long-term development of hydrogen uptake industries, and how the technology but also availability then will enable those less obvious applications?
Yeah, right. I think that this will be very much connected to infrastructure. So if you have infrastructure in a place, of course you will find the way of using the energy carriers that you have around the corner. So that's why I think it's very important to build infrastructure. But what I see now when I talk to the customers, the early adopters will probably be, number one, electricity producers of huge amounts of volume of electricity that don't want that electricity to go into the electricity market, but converting the electricity to hydrogen already at the wind park, finding customers on the other end of an infrastructure, thereby like securing the prices. This will only be relevant if you can use the hydrogen as hydrogen. If you start using the hydrogen, if you want to convert it back to other things, then you will lose energy suddenly, and there will be a harder way to find the commercially sound way of going forward. So what I think is that the pressure will come from offshore wind parks, for example. It's like a third or a tenth of the cost to transport big volumes of gas instead of big volumes of electricity. And they do want to find their markets, and those markets could be petrochemical and chemical industries, where you concentrate a lot of usage or consumption of hydrogen in one place, or the steel industry, of course, which, 55 to 70 terawatt hours in Norrbotten, plus H2 green steel with several hundreds of electrolyzer capacity, and Outokumpu on the Finnish side. So I think that the first contact will be there. But as we are building out the network, you will see smaller industries also adopting that, seeing the possibility to use hydrogen in their processes, both as a feedstock, but also as a fuel for different things. Now, when I come to Niklas and their very, very forward-leaning project around fuel cells in vehicles, I do believe in that, I must say, but I do think that there's some sort of hierarchy on the transport sector when it comes to liquid biogas first, electricity roads as second, and then fuel cells as the third. So when I would look at long term, that would be my long-term guess, the heavy-duty transport sectors, because they have alternatives already now to work with. But then hydrogen into households, yes, could be, probably. It's a tricky gas to work with. It's a very, very small molecule. and it ignites in a very broad spectrum. So there will be tests done now in the UK around using hydrogen in households, but we will see how that development will be here in the Nordics. We have district heating, and we are fairly happy with that one, and I'm not really certain that we will have hydrogen into the households. But definitely in the heavy-duty transport sector, long term.
And I think you quite eloquently mentioned, I think, one of the biggest advantages that I see with hydrogen. I mean, once you've produced it, right, hydrogen can be used as feedstock, it can be used as fuel in transportation, it can be used for heat, as you mentioned now, in houses, and we do see that development in gas-heated markets like the UK and Germany, but you can also use this back in purpose of electrification and re-electrification, right? Once you have it, the usage is agnostic, right? Hydrogen doesn't care what it is used for. But Niklas, maybe
and Andreas, you can structure it.
Yes,
and that's a huge advantage over electricity.
Yeah, indeed. Niklas, I mean, Hans already mentioned you and the business that Volvo is doing. But listening to Shay, Christian, and Hans, what is Volvo's perspective on those different applications and do you see maybe a convergence of different sectors? I mean, we've mentioned now steel, and we mentioned green chemicals, and we mentioned heating. And do you see these converging effects impacting your business?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I fully agree with Christian and Hans here on their outlook for the future. I will maybe if I start at the end of my own business now, so to say, on the truck OEM side, on the truck manufacturers of the world. I mean, we have 100 years behind us now with supply of fossil fuel or diesel, you know, and this shift that we see in front of us is of great importance, not only for us as truck manufacturers, but also for the society as such, you know, to keep us all moving and all the goods moving that we need to do. But we need to do it in a sustainable way, obviously. And what we can see then is that. As always, there is no one silver bullet, so there will need to be a combination of technologies going forward, and we go big time now into battery electric trucks, of course, and we are right now producing and selling those. We're starting in city application, then with distribution trucks and garbage trucks and what have you, and that technology. If you just followed, of course, you did follow the battery development over the years in the past and in the years to come. It's happening a lot there as well, right? So also on the truck side, we will go into more heavier trucks and more medium or even long haul transport actually with batteries. But having that said, it is a limit there. Somewhere there is a limit for the battery electric vehicles when it comes to weight and when it comes to energy storage and cost and everything. And that's where the fuel cell comes in then. So it's not actually a competition, if you like, between battery electric and fuel cell electric. We have a history, and Hans knows this by heart, that for many years when you're talking about alternatives to the fossil fuels, it's always starting to be discussed which of the two alternatives is the best one and how can they compete, but while they both should compete with the fossil alternative, right? So I can see sometimes that we are there also when it comes to battery electric vehicles and fuel cell electric vehicles. We are saying that we need both of them. And by the way, we will still need the internal combustion engine still also when we have converted completely to be fossil free, which is a difference then to passenger cars and light duty vehicles, which most likely will go 100% to battery electric vehicles and possibly to fuel cell electric vehicles, but possibly not keeping the internal combustion engine in the mix for the future. But for real heavy duty applications, for parts of the world where the hydrogen infrastructure will not be there or the charging infrastructure will not be there, then we will need the internal combustion engine still. But it needs to be fueled, of course, with sustainable biofuels, preferably actually green hydrogen, also for the internal combustion engine, works fine. Hans, I'm sorry to say we don't actually believe in the electric roads, though I must say, because the math doesn't count. You can't fix that equation actually if you look into it from a society investment perspective. But we will secure that the long haul transports are electrified either by batteries or fuel cells there. And the interesting thing then is that the transport sector and the truck OEMs, not at least, has been focusing on our own area for decades. What kind of technology should we have? How can society and the fuel energy providers secure that we have energy for these technologies going forward? What is more interesting actually in this paradigm shift that we're talking about now is for us to be very humble and to actually look at the other industry sectors around us, because this hydrogen society which we are entering into now, and it's very early days, as Kjell Christian is saying, it's very early days, and the future numbers of the amount of energy that needs to be there is huge, right? So there we need to be a little bit humble in the transport sector and see that, okay, we better follow what the steel industry will actually be doing now going forward, and the petrochemical industry will be doing, because they will most likely invest so much in the green hydrogen. And if we team up with them, then we can secure that we actually have green hydrogen available to the cost that is of essence here. Because for our customers and our customers' customer to actually do this shift from diesel, we need to secure the total cost of ownership, of course. And it's all about business when it comes to trucks. You can find some examples of logistic companies that wants to profile themselves being green and so on. But if we really want to make the big shift, then it needs to be cheaper, simply put, than diesel as well, right? And then we need to follow other partners in different sectors to see what is happening there. And we're also, just to end with, we are also heavily regulated, of course, in the transport industry on CO2 emissions. But what is more important is that our customers, and even more important, our customers' customers, are really interested in going green, right? If you just look at the retail industry, for instance, IKEA, if you like, you can only do so much with your own with your own operations, right? You come very quickly to transport. If you're a retail company and you want to go green, you come very quickly into the equation of transport, and that's where we, of course, play a role to secure that both inbound and outbound can actually take place with fossil-free transports.
And I mean, even when it comes to those more sustainable fuels, even there, hydrogen has to play a big role, right? Biogenic fuels need to be rehydrogenated. The oxygen content is naturally higher. So even there, hydrogen has to play a role. And I think this really goes to show that hydrogen is this great connector and this focal point for the convergence of both mobility, industry, and the energy sector. But from what we've heard so far, and I'm sure that we could talk about this for hours more, and really enjoy the discussion with you guys. But I believe that we can agree that there is a big potential for both hydrogen technology from the Nordic markets, but also hydrogen in the Nordic markets and the production here. So our Nordic industrial prowess, or how we want to call it. I think that there's companies developing the technological backbone. I mean, we have two of those here today, and really show this leadership in sustainability and the green revolution. So I would like to ask you, Kjell Christian, to share your view on what barriers, and right in the beginning we already went a little bit into, policy hurdles and regulation and incentives and grants that our governments have to put out, and we all know that there has been a lack of hydrogen strategies, and those strategies that have been posted, they lack teeth. So what's your view on these barriers and how we can overcome them?
Yeah, I think it's important, again, we are at the beginning of industrialization. So every project will be a first for the owner, it will be a first for the grid operator, it will be a first for the financing partner, it will be a first for the local, environmental agency. it will be a first for the grant agencies. It will be a first for everyone. There's a lot of firsts. That means that it takes time, you need trust, you need some regulation around it all. And also, since we are at the beginning of the cost curve, if you are sensible, you wait until the costs have come down. But, we need to have some projects that break the way and be that leadership. So we need that support for the first projects. And then we're not talking R&D. We're out of R&D support. Well, R&D support is good and to develop what will come after 2040. But now we're talking about scale up. This is what is required. And the other part, and I think Niklas talked very nicely about it, we have an opportunity to build on trust and good cooperation in Nordic countries. And as was also said before, if you have a large industrial offtake, then you can produce a bit more hydrogen. And then you can have some excess hydrogen to do the testing on the mobility side. Maybe you can connect one of our great Nordic utilities on the electrical side, where you have a couple of very good leading on a European basis utilities on renewable electricity that want to expand and go downstream. Vattenfall, Statkraft, great companies that have also taken this challenge on them. So there is a possibility to network well here, and we just need to build on that, and then we need to have a good and open dialogue with authorities to set it up so that we can realize these first large projects and get the ball rolling. That will allow for jobs, but it will also allow for a lot of competence building in the application of hydrogen all across the Nordic region.
Hans, maybe directing this to you, as you're being one of the veterans here when it's about suggesting advancement in policies, and I would like to ask you about your opinion and your perspective on the current situation.
Yeah, basically the very simple answer is we are lacking policy, regulation, business models, competitive technology towards the current fuels and things like that. But the thing is, and I'm on the EU Commission's Clean Hydrogen Alliance work, and we are just closing up the ask for projects around Europe, and there has been submitted over 1,000 projects to the Clean Hydrogen Alliance, and we are a fairly small part of Europe as well. There, but over 1,000 projects. You've seen the Swedish regions, also in the Swedish Electricity Commission, and there we have made handshakes with all the regions and a lot of players, like Volvo, for example, here on committing to this development. So although we lack all these things, we have many projects going on, and it's not only us that have identified that we are missing the framework in order to realize this thing. The EU has done that as well. So they are working heavily on the policy side, and we will see policy coming around towards the end of the year. My take on it all is that it should be regulated infrastructure, the possibility to use the regulated asset bases from the old network, so we can have a wise transition from the old network to the new network, so the old customers doesn't have to pay too much and the new customers don't have to pay too much either. From the Swedish side, though, we're, as both Niklas and Kjell-Christian mentioned, we are fairly late on the ball here. So we are right now working with our hydrogen strategy. The Energy Authority Agency is making a tremendously good job, but they will finalize it in October, and the EU directive will come in towards the end of the year. So we will have a hard time influencing the development on the EU side. So, while waiting for regulation, I think that there's an important thing for the Commission to do, and that is setting a very clear target on what they want to reach, and the cornerstones of the road to get there, so that we from the industry can adhere to that and start doing things, investing in things, believing in that the legislation will come within 18 months or finally, because I think we will do that. That power is out there right now, as long as we see how the first steps can look like. What I would like to hear from the Swedish society as well is the acknowledgement of sector coupling, the need of sector coupling, because the challenge of the volumes is so big. So in order to handle for example, the flexibility situation in the southern part of Sweden, we need to use all energy carriers and the industry's possibilities to be flexible, and the transport sector possibilities to be sector. That's why I basically share Niklas' view that it will be hard to have electricity roads in the southern part of Sweden, because we don't have the capacity on the electricity side there, and we should use it for the industry instead for transportation. But that is basically my take on it all. Regulated using the RABs, giving us a clear direction of where we want to go, and we will just follow, because everyone is prepared to do that.
And Niklas, I know that you're burning to answer on this too, but being aware of time, what is your 30 seconds message?
Oh wow! Yeah, thank you, Andreas. No, I think it's the key thing here is that we don't have much time. The globe don't have much time, so we can't just throw it out there that if you, Mr. Government, is doing this, then we, Mrs. Industry, might be doing that. And, we need to get going. And that was actually why we, together with our number one competitor in the world, Daimler Trucks, chose to invest ourselves then in the fuel cell development and production, because sending in the signal into the system that this time it's for real, the hydrogen society, also in the transport sector. And then I think just for the Swedish government, here it's a race. It is really a race, and other countries, not at least other member states in Europe, is going so fast now. So we must secure that we're not behind in strategies, but also in funding, incentive schemes, standardizations, not at least, both for filling stations and for trucks and for the whole value chain. So it's a lot of things to do in a very short time.
Thank you, and I think this is a good point for us to wrap up the discussion. And clearly, there's an excellent case for hydrogen in the Nordics, I think, but it's not smooth sailing as we just discussed. There's a lot of hurdles and challenges to overcome, but the level of ambition and the momentum is also very high. I would like to thank the excellent panel and you guys, and if it would be the corona-free time, I'd love to give you a bouquet of flowers now, but we've arranged it in a way that hopefully soon it will arrive at your door. And yeah, thanks again, Niklas, Christian, Hans. And a big thanks, obviously, also to those who helped to organize the seminar, and of course, you, our audience. And if you're interested in what EY is doing in these matters, please don't hesitate and reach out. But you can also go to the website, and this seminar will be recorded and available for later viewing. So with that, thank you all and goodbye.